Welcome to the Wealth Tech Insider. I'm today's host, Peter Worn, for episode 2 of our 2-part special, which is myself and my business partner and friend Aron Satchell talking about our journey on the Finura journey and our time together working as a duo. So, welcome back, Aron.
Hi, welcome back. Good to be back.
Back for more. He hasn't run off on me, so that's good. And so this is a sort of the part 2. So part 1, we spent a lot of time talking about our history, how we got here, probably some of those experiences that shaped who we are and how we run our business today. And so that was quite cathartic to get some of that stuff documented and refreshed. But this is more of a forward-looking episode and a good opportunity for Aron and I as we approach the business planning part of the year to talk about what's ahead. But we're not going to talk about next year, mate. I think let's talk about some of the longer term things we're grappling with. And so this is probably twofold. One is Finura as a business, and probably secondly, Finura's product strategy and just general strategy in a pretty dynamic environment, mate. So let's get into it. So I just want to sort of cover the first thing. So we have a software business now and a consulting services business. So they're sort of two separate companies. As of July, I think they'll be separate companies. And so we've made that decision quite deliberately, Aron, because they're obviously businesses that operate really, really differently. What's probably not well understood by people who haven't built software before is the economics that drive software development. So I'm just keen for you to give us your take on why it's so hard to build great software.
Cost, right? Yeah, like anyone I think who's embarked on any size or scale of software project knows that it comes with a pretty significant price tag, right? I think we set out on this journey. We were building advice design. We spoke a little bit about it on our last sort of pod there, but I think we had some ranges in mind. We sort of knew that, to build a piece of software that did X, Y, Z would cost about this. And I think you and I sort of went, well, great, that's the estimate we've got, but we know that we've probably got to double that. And I think that's the reality. Like, I think, as you're moving along that journey to build something, which inevitably takes time, it costs more. And requirements change, the environment changes around you, and then you learn along the way as well. Like, I think perhaps if you go and read, a lot of the blogs out of Silicon Valley and people building customer-facing tools or perhaps tools in less regulated industries, you go, well, actually, it's probably easy to spin up a tool or a solution that does sort of, this or that. But the thing that keeps me awake at night is obviously we operate in a regulated industry, and we've got hard obligations that we have to meet around protecting data and all the stuff that goes with that. And so there's cost to that. There's an upfront cost and there's an ongoing cost to make sure that you meet those obligations. Yeah, absolutely. And look, inevitably, I think you spoke a bit about it in the last episode as well. You're moving along, you go, well, wouldn't it be great if it did blah, do this, and then all of a sudden you're off on a tangent, you're building something, and 3 months later you've built that thing and you've realized, well, actually that was quite an expensive journey. I think you do. So you do develop that discipline, I think, where you sort of have to game out, if we did build that and it costs this, what's our return on investment? What does that look like for us? Yeah, I think perhaps something you and I, and maybe you thought a bit more about this, perhaps something you and I talk about all the time is that we're building software for a narrow industry. And so, we've got pretty good views on what our total accessible market is and the economics to, what that means in terms of user numbers. So there's got to be a commercial return as well. So you can't over-index on the investment up front when you're building these things. It's a balance. It's a hard balance.
So I'm going to go on a limb here, mate. We didn't talk about this before, but I think we should share how much money we've spent on our software, because I think it's important for people getting into this game to understand what it costs. Secondly, I think it's important for our users to understand why we need to charge what we charge. And the third element, I think that's probably less understood, is that there's just an unhealthy lack of understanding in the market of just what's involved to make shit. It's really great out there in the market. So we spent nearly $2 million in capital to get the product to where it is today. And in reality, mate, like, that was pretty lean. Right?
It is.
You tell me, but so
there's a lot of sweat equity. There's a lot of sweat equity in that upfront,
so
from us and
cash,
our team.
Right?
That's cash.
That's really the nights and mornings and weekends and everything.
Included. Yeah. Exactly right. Yeah. And it's lean, right, in the sense that we had a pretty firm view up front of what we wanted to build. We had very well-detailed set of requirements, wireframes. We architecturally knew what we were building, and we were very lucky also to have a software partner who was happy to come on that journey with us and operate in a very nimble way as well. Because unlike perhaps an enterprise software project where you're estimating it up front and then you've got pages and pages and pages of requirements and all the stuff that goes with that documentation. We have that, but we did it in a very lean way. Yeah, we were able to short circuit that politics of a typical software project and really acted quite, iteratively. Yeah,
mate. Some of those big companies you're talking about, they'd spend $500,000 just to do the estimates. Quarter of our total cost before they even laid a line of code.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And complexity is the thing that blows out costs. And I think that we spend a lot of time wading through, complexity around integrations, data model. Like there's all the really unsexy stuff, the stuff that, I know your eyes glaze over on and that Casper and I have pretty robust and at times heated debates over internally. But that matters, that absolutely matters. And so getting that complexity resolved is a way to reduce the cost as well. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't glaze over it, mate. I think it's just that our users, I mean, the best compliment I think we'll ever get is when someone says it just works and it works every time. Now, we can't always control every part of the equation, but as long as our bit does that, and I know for a user to say that requires a shit ton of effort and infrastructure. So, and they shouldn't care, but as in they should just expect that. But that's not the reality in software in our sector. A lot of it is stuck together with sticky tape. And I think people feel that,
Yeah, and this is and it's a whole podcast in its own right. It's like maintaining legacy systems. I think we work with a number of institutional clients, super funds, and these sorts of businesses that are finding out now that there is enormous cost to maintain those legacy systems. But they're often hamstrung to move into that new world because for a whole host of reasons. So I mean that's the benefit we've got. We can move quite quickly. We're on a contemporary platform. We built something quite new, and we're a new organisation. But something talking about the future that I think about is that, well, you know what? In 5 years' time, we won't be so new. We'll have to start grappling with what that looks like in the future and staying contemporary and keeping up with all the stuff that goes with that. Otherwise, we will be in the same position. Yeah.
I mean, I'd love to be in that position where we got so many years, but I think I mean, I know other software companies we've spoken to look at Advice Designer with a bit of envy because it's built in such a clean new way on contemporary cloud infrastructure. It's snappy. But it won't always be like that. Like software will change. There's no doubt about it in the next 5 years. But I guess we were asked a really good question. So we have taken on some capital into the software business. So we split out our business. We've got a capital partner now for our software company, which is really important for us to continue to invest in our product and grow it. But we were asked by investors, well, if we gave you more money, which is always a lovely question to be asked, and we're very grateful that we've got the support we have, but if we gave you more money, could you go faster? Could you do more? So that's a question. What's your take on that question?
I think we had to grapple with this, right? When we were midway through, we spoke a bit about it in the last episode where, DBFO was coming and there was obviously a bit of a shift in regulatory environment and, we had an opportunity to take on more capital to go faster. But I think the question I had back to you at that point in time was, well, what does faster look like? And, if we think about that in a software sense, adding, again, pre-Gen AI, adding more developers to a software project doesn't necessarily increase the velocity. Yeah. Like particularly where you're working on complex sort of, things. And so I think we sort of came to the conclusion that, even with more capital, we probably couldn't use that to move quicker. And the thing that perhaps was burning in the back of our minds was that even if we could go quicker, would the output be of quality? Would we get to the point that we needed to get to where we knew we could launch a product that had sufficient value, that we could demonstrate an MVP, but that met the pretty high standard of quality that we set internally for users? And I think the answer was no at that point in time. But I think to your point just then around, having a capital partner support us through this next stage, I think we always knew that once the solution had been built, and that we'd sort of proven that out into market with our MVP, that we would need additional capital to, grow out our roadmap. And we've got a long list of things that we absolutely want to build in the platform for Advice Designer, but we would need to scale. Yeah, and I think something that we grapple with every day is around how do we be really smart about onboarding users into Advice Designer, do it in a really frictionless and easy way. Thinking about we had our product. We had our team planning day recently, and we talked a lot about the Wes Bush product-led growth frameworks. How do we do that with a small team? Great book
for software founders to have a read of.
So how do how do we stay a small team but have outsized impact to onboard people frictionlessly? And I think, anyone who's ever tried to onboard themselves to new financial technology in our space knows that it's bloody hard. There's challenges and friction associated with it. And so, we're trying to shift that view, but we need capital to be able to do that, invest in the right tools, automated onboarding flows, ground to pick up when things do go wrong. We don't always get it right, and things absolutely do go wrong, and we need to be able to proactively go outbound on that. So there's a lot to think about. We're switching modes between launch to go time.
I guess the good thing is we've got paying customers, so that counts as validation, and they seem to be liking the product, which is great. It always takes longer than you think. Like, I'd love more clients, but equally, what's more rewarding is when the users are just giving us great feedback about, hey, it's making a big difference in my day to day, and I enjoy using it. That's the software. It was always my first impression when you guys first sort of started showing me what you were building. It was just the simplicity of it that I loved. And you can tell that every button's got a purpose. I don't know, that's not always that way. You can tell you're big on this, Aaron. That's one of your great skills, I think, is building user interfaces. That I look at a lot of software now, and old software particularly, it looks like the Challenger space shuttle cockpit. There's a button for everything. Yeah. And you go, why? Why did you need that?
Balancing complexity is not easy, right? Like, I think you've got to, but this is staying true to our purpose. I think we sort of knew out of the gates we had to build something around advice generation, giving people that, obviously the advice document, but the digital online presentation, that was hard. We had to really think about how we could appeal to the broadest base possible, but at the same time make it simple, dynamic, easy to build. And you know what? It's not always easy. I know, like I said before, Casper and I have very robust debate almost weekly on things, and he obviously comes from it from a very engineering lens, and I'm a little bit more UX based, and obviously there's a bit of friction there. But I think that's a healthy thing. It's a healthy debate in our team to be able to go through that process, and we all come. Yeah.
And so let's talk about growth. So we're getting some more capital in the business. Where do you see that money going, mate? I mean, what's the scaling growth's a real challenge, and the reality is that unlike probably the sexy startup stories we're hearing with AI and open AI and these huge numbers, is that, as you rightly say, we have a ceiling in terms of the number of people we could sell to currently in our market, and what it looks like for advisors in Australia. And so there's a sweet spot between how much you got to spend and versus what people are willing to pay. But from your perspective, what are the sort of the big ticket items that you think most software companies need to be spending money on right now?
Look, our roadmap capital for us is really around roadmap and development. Like, I think the ongoing development costs we've got around, the features. I think the key thing on our roadmap, and we're thinking about the back half this year, is obviously reviews. We know that, alongside advice being delivered, reviews is the next biggest pain point for practices to deliver. And so there's a pretty significant investment that we'll make into the platform around, building out reviews.
Yep.
And there's lots of parts to that, right? There's investments in the data feed piece to that. There's the advice and the review. There's the digital presentation. So, we've definitely earmarked, capital for that. But, sitting alongside that is the other things that we know we need to do along the way. And so I think, we think about, other ecosystem partners. Work Sorted is one of them that we call out. I think, that's something we're working on right now, and we've had a lot of feedback from prospects and practices being onboarded that, like we've done with My Prosperity most recently, developing an integration into Work Sorted is highly sought after. So we'll go live with that, which is exciting the next little while. But it's just the process of scaling our team. It's having the right people in our team to be able to develop the onboarding tools. And so something that I challenge, Depal and Helena on almost daily is, how can we take a lot of the concepts that you mentioned in that Wes Bush sort of, product-led growth and product-led onboarding process. We call it the bowling alley, right? How do we get someone from onboarded and right through to producing their first piece of advice and delivering that digitally? How to do that in the shortest span of time? And what are the things we need to remove as friction points to that journey to do that? And how do we automate that? And so it's not necessarily Gen AI. We're not using an AI tool to do that, but thinking about things like Intercom is a tool that we use, and automating the onboarding process, being able to responsively provide feedback to users through the journey. And be proactive, because if we're going to grow and we're going to onboard, the users that we want to onboard, we have to scale our technology solutions that we use to onboard those users, and not necessarily grow our team, by a huge number to do that. I think we lose that, and we don't want to lose that sort of, personal touch, that relationship that we have with the customer as well on onboarding.
Well, I think you want the personal touch, but you want it at the right parts, and it shouldn't be at every part. And the reality is that I feel that our users are pretty widespread. So we have software users like advisors here in Australia using our software. We've got paraplanners in the Philippines using our software. We've got paraplanners in Mexico now, Aaron, I hear, using our software. And so software is 24/7. And so you're right, mate. You've got to have things that can help the user when they want help. And I mean, one benefit, I suppose, now is certain generations hate picking up the phone, so we don't need to have a phone number. But you want that active support at the right time. But we run it bloody lean, and so we're always fascinated. So I get asked a lot of questions. We don't have a salesperson for Advice Designer. We're doing our utmost to put enough information out there and make the product simple enough that it doesn't really need to be sold. It's just really training and onboarding the user. And yes, we'll obviously work with the customer to sort of work out if it's right for them or not. Contrary to popular belief, and this is something I don't understand about hiring salespeople, and I'll struggle with this forever, is that let's say we hire a great salesperson, right? And that person goes out, gun salesperson, brings in all these deals. But what if those clients it's just not right for, and they churn off in 2 months? Churn is a term for cancelling, for the uninitiated. They cancel their software. How much money do we lose, Aaron, on those users if they cancel in the first couple of months?
Yeah. Well, we have to quantify that number, right? But I think about it all the time. Like there's an acquisition cost, right, for that onboarding process.
Yeah.
And more importantly, we have to learn. Look, I'm happy to say we've got very low churn because we're targeting users up front, and we're deliberately moving through a process where we're educating them through the demo process and hand holding through the onboarding process, and we've done some really good stuff with the UI. But it's a right fit, right? Like we're focused on that bowling alley framework, like I spoke about earlier, where we're moving the user through that sort of value process really quickly, or as quickly as we can, so they realize value, so it becomes a sticky relationship, and they're seeing value really quickly. But it's easy on, easy off, right? I think that in some cases, and we have had some churn, right, where you just have to recognize that if it's not right, it's not right, and right place, right time, yeah.
And my fingerprints on some of those clients that have come in. And I reckon, you know what it is though? I reckon some of those customers, and we're so grateful that they gave us a crack, and that's why we never try and retain them. There's a retention team. If you cancel, you're straight off, no problem. But it's because they're just so desperate for a solution and something better that they'll, almost beg us to be onboarded is how I would describe it. And I struggle to say no sometimes, particularly when there's a potential sale. But then you sort of know intuitively that person's probably not willing to do the work to sort of change some of their things that they do. And it's just they're looking for a silver bullet, And I think we're getting much better now at working out who they are, and we coach them in the sales process to say, hey, if this is real, in fact, that doesn't exist. You'll need to
work at it. It'll work at it.
But I think that's why I'm really nervous about having a proper salesperson, if that makes sense, because I just think they just can't help themselves much.
Yeah.
Unless they're really well coached.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe we'll. I don't know.
But I think this is to running lean, right? I think it's everyone in the business is in the sales team. Like I think we all pitch in when there's demos that need to be done. I think we've all become really good at and we are just intuitively good at demoing to the client. And I think that's really important though, because we all and we don't speak about this enough, but there's definitely, whilst our business between consulting and the applications businesses are separate, we learn a lot through those consulting engagements. I think that we have engagements with clients, and I think we always learn something new. Like, speaking to practice managers and CSOs and paraplanners and seeing how they're using existing tools and other tools in the marketplace and going, you know what, that it either works or it doesn't work, or just hearing the frontline stories from those users is immeasurable, because we bring that back and we think about that and we turn that into something on the product side of the business. And so I think if we would be poorer in terms of ideas and knowledge if we didn't do consulting as well as having a software business.
Mate, 1,000%. I think because we know intuitively who it's right for and who it's not. We can distinguish that, I think, really quickly now. DePaul and I've created some lead management stuff to sort of manage that better. But second of all, I think the value that particularly Danny and Simon, our consulting team, who absolutely sit at arm's length to the software side, but they give us feedback all the time, and they're actually just by coincidence working on a couple of onboardings for clients that are part of many things implementing Advice Designer. And so even just seeing the process they're taking clients through is so helpful to us, because we're learning as we go as well. And obviously having someone like Simon Betchley and the team who worked at WorkSorted for so long, who actually do onboarding really well as a company, I think, has been awesome for us, because we probably I think
Well, it's good to have outside influence, outside perspective. I think when you've been building something for a couple of years and you're a bit of an echo chamber because you've sort of got everyone in the business, it's good to have
yeah,
someone who's close to it, who's done it in a similar sort of space, give you that feedback and
yeah,
that clean set of eyes. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Mate, I just want to call out something too. So obviously you built advice designer with the team, and you not once in the process, I could be wrong, did you really ever go out and talk to advisors on how they wanted to use software? Can you just talk us through how you built something almost in isolation of a committee or a think tank group, a focus group?
Focus group,
How'd you do
no
it?
focus group. Yeah. Look, I think we had a view initially that we'd sort of come from a world where we had some really strong feedback over many years in our former business. We knew the industry really well and what was shifting at that time. And I think that's how we anchored ourselves through that initial design process. And so I think something that was really important to us was that we were sort of merging a couple of ideas, right? We were merging this sort of, how can we, change the way in which advice is delivered, digitally present that in a nice dynamic way. So whilst we might not have gone out and spoken to paraplanners and advisors during that period, we most certainly spoke to a lot of people in other segments, other spaces outside of financial advice and wealth tech
Yep.
around how different pieces of software like proposal writing software and digital presentation tools and those sorts of things were doing it in different verticals. And so I guess in those early days, we lent heavily on our industry expertise and we trusted our gut a lot internally and lent externally on things outside our space. But then obviously we shifted. So, we're at this point now where we've gone live, we've proven ourselves from an MVP standpoint. We've, onboarded
Yep.
our early practices who are getting a lot of value out of that. I think now there is a shift for us to go back to industry because obviously time has changed.
Cool.
DBFO is coming. Gen AI is here, a whole lot of things. And that, we're mindful that we can't operate in isolation now that we've gone live. And so we will have to think about that from a feedback standpoint. And the reality is we get feedback daily from users. Yeah.
You do?
People love to offer their opinion and their perspectives on things. And I think that's, it's really important. But the challenge for us now, right, is to go, how do we distill that feedback into meaningful chunks of features that we can deliver and not, not water down the simplicity, the effortless nature of our platform, but also deliver value. And that's hard, right? Like I think we're definitely learning to do that still. So, and I think we didn't design by committee, and the other thing was we didn't take a compliance first approach. And I think when we think about advice generation as an industry, often any project that gets stood up in this space is template driven, hard compliance controls driven, focused sort of outcome. And I think we came at that differently. We went the other way and said, what would a workflow look like that was much easier? And then we overlaid obviously the compliance controls and requirements that sat on top of that. So yeah.
Yeah. Interesting enough, though, and shout out to our friends at Tangelo, but when they gave you feedback on how things are going, a lot of it, there was some tweaks that we had to make for sure. But a lot of it was about if it actually aids in the client's understanding of the advice, then you're doing
benefit. You're doing a positive thing. It's a net positive thing. Absolutely. Yeah. And you've got to push back on some of the, not that we had anything to push back with Tangelo on there, but I think the nature of delivering advice digitally through a digital presentation and these sorts of things, like I think we've had to push the boundaries a little bit there in terms of, working with licensees and compliance teams and making sure that it sort of fits coherently into their licensee requirements. Obviously, it can be done. It absolutely can be done. But there's this risk, there's this business risk piece that has to be overlaid on top of that. And I think it's making sure that all the different stakeholders in the process feel comfortable with the way it's being delivered, the way that it's being configured, and that it fits inside their risk profiles. That's not investment risk profiles, but compliance risk and governance risk. Is the key thing there.
Well, let's face it, SOAs have been around for nearly 20-something years.
Yeah, a long time. Yep.
So it's, and we do SOAs still, but it's just the digital side. But I think I would say in a world where, and we'll get onto AI in a minute, but I think in a world of AI now, where, let's face it, somewhere out there in Australia right now, there's advisors trying to do SOAs and ChatGPT. Has to be, right? That for me feels like a much greater risk than people using a new bit of software which still generates a really good high quality advice document with the digital presentation than the alternative. And I feel that I have to say, full credit to the licensees we are partnered with. They have by and large been pretty embracing because they too acknowledge that things have to change, which is awesome. Yeah.
I think the other thing is that, Gen AI is really attractive, it's sexy, it's new, it's moving phenomenally quick, right? But we know, back to our consulting engagements there, that we time and again we go into practices who don't have an advice template, or they've got a Word document that they copy and paste into. They don't have a wizard that they've maintained. Like, I think, there's just this missing fundamental element in many of these engagements with these businesses. And so I sort of go, well, if you want to go and use those amazing tools, but you don't have any of these fundamental building blocks right, then you're really in the wrong spot. Yeah, and I think that's why I'm like, let's stay true to our purpose with Advice Designer around striking this middle ground. And then what Gen AI is going to develop, and we're going to be able to integrate those things into the platform. And we're already seeing people using, as you often call out, things like Grammarly and plugins that are easily embedded within the browser for people to rewrite, change tone of voice, all sorts of stuff like that. And so AI might not be a feature we have on the platform, but I think that it'll be an AI ecosystem where you can effectively plug in this tooling that just works alongside the workflow of the advisor or the paraplanner. Yeah, absolutely.
So, mate, let's talk about AI. So you and I have probably watched with interest advisors embracing AI-wrapped file noting tools and different things like that have emerged in the market. And I've got two competing ideas here. One is awesome to see advisors embrace something that clearly makes their lives better. But on the second hand, I look from a purely product software perspective and go, gee, that's a pretty disruptable part of the equation. Like, for example, I got asked recently by a client, why doesn't Finura just build something? Because you guys have probably built something pretty cool. I'm like, oh, geez. By the time we finished it, I just feel like we're building something that's already irrelevant and redundant. And funny enough, this morning, OpenAI announced all their integration protocols, which basically tells me that if we wanted to at some point in time, we could build a pretty nice integration with ChatGPT to Advice Designer in a safe way. And even within that now, OpenAI has a transcription feature, which is device agnostic and can pretty much consume data from Teams and everywhere else. So, I mean, bugger me. That just makes a lot of things redundant, in my opinion. So, like, in your eyes, from a product development point of view, where do you see the real natural ways that you think AI could improve what we do, and what would we offer?
I think for us, I mean, we've been thinking about this for a while now, because we sort of knew that we were going to launch our MVP, go to market, expand out that roadmap that I talked about earlier, yep. But that, AI didn't feature in our roadmap there. So we've architected on AWS. AWS has got some really great Gen AI capabilities that you can pick up out of the box and do some pretty innovative things with. And so while we sort of looked at some of those things and thought about them, we haven't really plonked any of them into our roadmap. And the reason for that really is that we're probably thinking more about integration. We just know that in time we'll have a really content-rich, data-rich platform that can do some really great things. And to your point, that a lot of these AI tools will evolve, and the integration between our platform and those AI tools will be where the game will be, not in the actual developing of AI tools ourselves. Look, it's just use cases, right? Like, I think about the use cases. I think when the first version of ChatGPT got released, or custom GPTs got released, I think you said to me, wouldn't it be great if we could build this, advice, we have Advice Library as a standalone product. I don't know if you remember. And wouldn't it be great if we could just, codify that, have our own little LLM that ran and run the strategy text over the top of that. And I think we'd want to build something, right? And I think at the time we were talking about that with our software developers as well. Could we productize this? Like, we've got a content business that we could do something with. And in the space of, I don't know what it was, maybe a month, 2 months or something like that, we went up an entire version of GPT, and all of a sudden, it was spitting out just native, results based on that, like not even fed out of, a sort of a corpus of information that we had. And I mean, you obviously know where ChatGPT is now, right? So I just think that's the reality. Like, I think that stuff just moves so quickly that, and it's back to this capital discussion as well. Like, I think if we deployed capital to go and do something quite specifically in that space, I think we would, it would hamstring us in other areas where we know we absolutely have to deliver core platform features. So I guess it's keep an eye on it. Think about it as an integration sense, because I think that Copilot and ChatGPT and these other platforms will just have really great integration patterns that we can work with in the future. Yeah.
And I even think, as you alluded to, even natively within the browser. I mean, clearly Google's positioning Chrome, which is definitely the browser we recommend to use some of most software applications for a whole bunch of reasons. They're already talking about agentic, which is basically just like robots using the browser capability. So in time, there's going to be a lot of that things, both in your browser, probably on your device,
Yep.
Aaron. There's now Copilot natively on your device.
Yep.
And so you're right. So just to replay what you see, so what you're basically saying is that the real value in a lot of these products is the data and the platforms that they and how they structure the data, and then the AI really just taps it.
Yeah. Because we had even kicked around, doing some really things. You think about like Intercom's a really good example. There's some embedded sort of AI that they came out with really quickly in their platform, for support agents to respond to support end users, which is effectively, they've got a GPT that sits underneath that with some pre-built prompts for responses, which is really good, but it's very narrowly focused on that use case. Yeah. I just think that, we're just going to see a meshing of sort of Gen AI to contemporary tools really closely, where instead of having pre-built prompts that are delivered through the software and that are codified in a package of software, the end user can just do that seamlessly. That you can configure your own, and I mean, I'm already playing around with it. Some standard sort of prompts and prompt chains for things, like pulling together a bedtime story that has very specific sort of narrative flow for my daughter, right? And I think that we'll see that in a more business context in the future. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I had this idea. I mean, I sort of see where OpenAI is going with the deal they've done with Johnny Ive, the iPhone designer, and they're clearly building a device. And so lots of speculation that's just going to be something that we wear. It just sees and hears everything, which is kind of scary. But people will buy it, I'm sure. But we have this concept of bring your own device to work. That's become a thing. So back in the old days, your phone was issued to you, your BlackBerry. I wonder 10 years from now, will we bring our own AI to work? Will we have such a personalized experience of AI? And you can see ChatGPT is pretty keen on us getting a lot of data in there about ourselves to personalize it, that it becomes that. It becomes more of that personal tool, and then that AI feature becomes less of a thing. It's more ubiquitous.
It's ubiquitous. It's embedded. It's actually, it's not something that sits off to the side. Yeah. And that's where I think a lot of these AI products sit at the moment. They sort of sit off to the side outside the workflow, seamlessly fit into the way we work and the way we interact with stuff in the future. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
One last question on AI. Starting to hear some rumors or noise from AI software companies, startups who are building validating apps and different bits and pieces for the sector, both in the UK, Australia, and the US, claiming that they can build an AI that generates an SOA in a minute using just a file note. Can you just talk through what you perceive as the technical difficulty in actually doing that and why it's unrealistic?
So I think it'd be good to talk about some of those other use cases that you and Danny have worked on recently as reasons why this challenge. Look, I think AI can absolutely draft a document, an SOA, and it's not the actual drafting of the document or the compiling of the document itself. It's all the steps that sit in front of it. So back to my example earlier, where when we go into these practices that don't have a template, they aren't using any of the tools, they don't have structure around the way they do the research and financial modeling and these sorts of things. Like the reason that any GPT is really good at giving you output documents and responses is because it's been trained on a huge model, and that there's a really good template example. So you can go and ask it to write a contract for you, and to do a really good job. You'll get a pretty good contract for your jurisdiction. It's still generic in nature. You've got to know the nuances of how it's been drafted, right? And I think the same applies for the actual advice document itself. You need to make sure it's structured on the way that the SOA needs to be delivered. But the harder nuances here is, well, if the financial modeling hasn't been done, or the research hasn't been done, or that it hasn't been checked or validated, or it's been verified against the original file note that the advisor wants to be done, I think it becomes really difficult to translate that data into a structure that's sufficient for an SOA to be produced. And so I think we've definitely seen some AI partners and developers who are doing this reasonably well for records of advice, less complex advice, less complex scenarios, very narrowly focused on single entities. It doesn't have following, it's simple switches, use cases that are reasonably well worn. But I think once you move up the sophistication of advice and complexity of advice curve, it becomes more challenging, it's difficult. And so probably don't say it won't do it, but I think it won't be writing it independently of interaction with the advisor. I think what will happen is that we'll end up having workflows, as we were just talking about earlier, where the advisor is iteratively working with AI through that process flow as advice recommendations are formulated, as financial modeling is completed and research is done, and that they're basically working in parallel. So maybe it is agentic AI, produce the document, draft the document in the end. But I do think it's a bit of a bridge too far to think that we can just feed in some details, push a button and get ourselves an advice document at the end, a compliant one at least. I think that's a bit too far. Yeah.
My thing is that the AI never says, I
Don't
don't
know.
know.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it'll always give you an outcome. And so for me, it's a hybrid.
Absolutely.
I just think like we're seeing at the moment, people using Grammarly and different things in our plugins in app. I think agents using software like ours effectively in some of the more mundane parts of it to automate that. But still I just think in such a highly regulated, personalized industry to sort of take your hands off the wheel completely and not understanding the workings of how it got there. Yeah, it just feels primitive.
And pretty sophisticated prompts, I think, multi-chain prompts to be able to get the outcome you're looking for.
That won't work every
time. That won't work every time, and there's got to be a human in the middle, to validate what's happening and make sure that you're getting the right outcome. Context window is the other one as well, right? Like I think that whilst, the context windows for a lot of these LLMs is pretty big now, it's pretty significant. When you start in the amount of product research that's going in for comparisons, the financial modeling for multiple entities, there's a lot of data that's going in. If that's not structured in a way that's conducive to the AI to be able to interpret it and push that into an SOA in the end, you do get that drift.
Yep.
You get drift, and I think that's why human in the middle is still a reality, I think, for this.
Yeah. And I think the bit I like your natural conservatism on this stuff is that back to our original discussion around the huge responsibility I think that a software vendor or application vendor has in this market when it's highly regulated to not inadvertently do something that puts its users at risk, both from a data security perspective, but even from a compliance governance perspective, because if things go wrong, the software company ain't going to be there to help you go through the audit. And I'm still waiting for the day where a file note issue raises and because an AI hallucinated, something's not right. And and as much as the AI solutions quite rightly say, hey, you still got to check it, they say all those things, there's just going to be people out there that don't. They trust it too much. It's like my parents' trusts in social media news.
I think this is it. We don't talk.
We've got to be more skeptical.
We've got to be skeptical about the output, And this is probably not something that's talked about enough. Fail safe in the prompts. Give the actual LLM an out. If it can't complete that.
Yeah, we just, as you alluded to, Danny and I just finished probably our first major AI project for a client, which we agreed to do with some reluctance, but I'm glad we've done it, and I think we'll probably do some more. But it was literally to generate 3 paragraphs of investment commentary text. 3 paragraphs. Now, granted, for about 300 different portfolios, so lots of data went into that, but you saw it. And to get consistency, reliability, and accuracy required, I think we had 100 prompt iterations across 3 or 4 different LLM models that we had to use. We had to get data structured correctly in the right way, and we had to build 400 lines of JavaScript code to get it structured to access that data in a reliable, safe way. So this ain't stuff you can just slap together and it works every time. And that was, again, the 3 paragraphs of non-personalized text.
Yeah, and so it's consistency, right? And there's obviously very specific requirements around the way that organisation wanted to deliver their commentary and the volume of data that was being fed in, right? Because it's, that's the summary, but effectively the LLMs are putting a lot of data to get that as a result, and consistency. But again, human in the middle, off-ramping when something can't be done. Yeah.
All right, mate. That's a good flavour for where we see AI coming. So I guess just to wrap things up, I guess I'm kind of keen on it was a big goal for products or problems that we were trying to solve in the industry. Sort of, I think we've tackled advice gen really, really well. I think we're going to do client review generation. Like, they are huge problems, and I would love to tackle implementation of advice. I think we'll have more to say about that next year. What's the big one, do you reckon, to solve?
Look, I think it's I think near term, but I think if we cast our mind out, in 10 years' time, I think it's just around the efficiency, the interaction between the practice and the advisor. And I think conceptually, I just look at other industries and the way that they engage and why they're way ahead of where we are in financial services. And I think, what can we do with advice design? Because that's our platform, right? Like, this is the platform we're going to be building on. What can we do with that platform to do that little bit to nudge our industry in the right direction to help us improve that interaction between us and the client ultimately? And I think we'll chip away at it slowly, like these platform execution, solving that implementation issue, reviews, and obviously advice as well. And I think advice is still the core of our industry. It's what we deliver, and it's the value that advisors, deliver to their clients. And so I'm looking forward to, and the industry is looking, our team is looking forward to what comes with DBFO and our ability to be able to think about rethinking the way advice is delivered. And that's part of that. Yeah, the big thing in my mind. Yeah. technology focused and more just experience ultimately to the end customer.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. We do. You're right. And I'm probably too heavy on the let's do this, let's do that. But you're right. It's about that making the experience just really easier for the client all round, end to end, everything they do. I think it's a great philosophy. I was mortified to read on one of the industry forums last night, someone asking where do people get their SOAs print and bound, with quick turnarounds. I'm like, holy shit, we are still printing and binding SOAs. I remember doing that at Retire Invest when I was a paraplanner in 2003, hating every second of it, mucking up these documents. And I didn't know there were still practices doing that stuff.
Yeah.
So if that's you, give us a call. I think we can show you something different. And those, God knows, those color printer ink cartridges are probably as expensive as ever.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think we can do better.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And so there's that evolution, supporting that evolution from industry, moving away from just paper documents to something that's wholly more engaging and showcasing.
Yeah. Great, mate. That's great. All right. Well, that's probably a good spot to wrap up. Aaron, any other?
I think that's it. Yeah.
Wisdom or things you want
to cast our mind forward, and for our next 4-year birthday, it'll be 8 years then, right? Like the key thing, time flies by, right? Like I can't believe it's been 4 years and it's been a decade for you and I, mate. And I sort of go, it's not an overnight success. It takes time. You've got to chip away at it. And I think that's the thing that we look forward to. The team looks forward to, and what can we become? What can we grow into? Yeah.
Yeah, and I do too. And I sort of, I think anyone who has been on this journey knows intuitively what we've been through. And so, and I think we need, as I said, I'm very grateful. I have had you as a business partner, our wives to support us, because you don't get these opportunities very often to start something from scratch. And yes, it takes a bit of guts and courage, but it's so much, my learning is it's so much easier to do it with someone else. I just think to do it solo, I know people have and do, but I think it requires a very special person to do that. And that's probably not me. So maybe that's the best advice is before you even go and start something, first try and find someone to do it with
100%,
and then work it out. And then maybe that's the big one.
Awesome.
All right, mate. Well, thanks for your time. I'll let you get back to your ISO audit, all the important stuff. Good. Okay, so thanks for listening to the Wealth Tech Insider. As always, you can go on the Finura Group website, finuragroup.com, access lots of good resources there, including our Tech Health Check, which we find is a valuable resource for practitioners who are just curious to know what they can be doing better with technology. Thanks for listening and look forward to having you next time.